Hey everybody, welcome. Wanted to get in the next piece. I know you're all leading the group this week and filming it or coming in person to lead it here at 10 a.m. And the next piece in the book is after you have led the group, and then we do this at every agency, we want to see how you evaluate the groups. Just to make sure it's good. If there are things that you could do to make it better, you get the feedback from folks. And so with that, I'm going to start the evaluation PowerPoint we made, if it will work for me today. A lot of times we would just give the electronic device to
Again, class, and welcome to our lecture on evaluation. As part of our group skills in substance, in addition to an exploration of evaluation in group work, this lecture will also include specific descriptions of how the week's materials fit into your group project. As you know, your group project will describe a group intervention, and the proposal will describe the specific population you have selected, as well as the type and the purpose of the group. Further, your group will outline the screening criteria for members, as well as group size, the group goals, an exploration of legal, ethical, and cultural considerations for your group, and termination criteria and outcome measures. The final portion of your group project will be a member progress update created for a fictional member of the group that you've created. In this progress update, you will describe and summarize a fictional client's behavior within your group based on any information you choose to include. You must describe the client's progress and identify the needs and issues that may require a modification in your treatment plan. This progress report should be written from the perspective of the group leader following the sixth session of the group. Be sure to include initial goals and any modifications based on your report. Please refer to the assignment rating rubric for more information, and be sure to use the document as your primary source as your group puts together the group project. Keep in mind that I'm happy to read and provide feedback on drafts that I receive on or before the date outlined in your syllabus. As we look at the objectives for the week, I want to remind you to review the chapter for the week prior to viewing the lecture, as it's intended to supplement your reading. By the end of this week, you should be able to identify the benefits, evaluation, and steps for incorporating evaluation into the group experience, and identify and describe the necessary components in the development of a treatment update for a group member. So at this point, you should have a pretty good idea of the life of a group, beginning at the point where leaders come up with an idea and design and plan a group, as well as an understanding of the different stages that groups go through and the issues related to leadership and group dynamics, and even a bit about terminating group. Today, we're going to talk about the big question of how we know the group has worked. Pretty much regardless of your setting, you'll need to have evidence for the effectiveness of what it is you're doing. In the group context, we must show that the group makes some difference in the lives of our clients or adds value to the service we provide at that site. We could think of a college orientation process as a task group that provides new students with the information they need to thrive in their new environment. But how would we know if that orientation group was successful? Naturally, we would want to know the extent to which the program was effective in delivering the intended outcomes, and there are a couple of ways that we can go about evaluating those efforts. So first, what's evaluation? Evaluation is an ongoing process that benefits both the group members and the group leaders, and can track the progress of individual members and the groups as a whole. Evaluation can be understood as assigning a value or worth to something, and in many cases, we can think about using an evaluation to decide whether or not a group is worth the time and the resources that we invest in it. Evaluation provides information that can be used to improve group leadership or the overall group experience moving forward. It gives us an opportunity to measure and communicate what we're doing and how it's working. And it also gives us information on those areas that need improvement. Evaluation can also track individual progress. Evaluation can also track individual progress through client treatment plans and updates. So if we think about that college orientation group again, we would need to consider our intended goals and outcomes. What information were the students supposed to learn? What delivery methods did we provide? A brief survey could collect information on both student knowledge and student experience, with questions aimed to address whether or not they retained specific information, and other questions aimed to address the level of satisfaction. This evaluation could provide feedback on individual members. Did Monica learn where to get her student ID? And could also tell us on a larger scale how effective the overall group was. How many students could find the health center on a campus map? The evaluation can also be used to inform us where we might need to make improvements in the orientation program, and could also provide feedback on the overall enjoyment or satisfaction from the members. Keeping in mind that evaluation and the question of whether or not a group has worked will vary according to the situation and perspective, let's talk a little bit about some methods. Evaluation instruments may be self-designed or standardized, but conducting a thoughtful and intentional evaluation will lead to improvement in the design for future groups. Standardized scales exist as a way to offer greater statistical confidence in your findings, and they can be used to help demonstrate the effectiveness of your group. For instance, if you were running a psychoeducational group for teens at risk for alcohol use, you could have them take an alcohol awareness survey during the first session of the group, and then again at the end. Because your group was intended to raise awareness regarding the potentially damaging effects of alcohol, your sessions provided members with information and examples of these effects, and you would expect that the members would earn higher scores if they're participating in your group. You can also design scales or surveys that meet the needs of your particular group, but recognize that there are limits to the instruments because they've not been validated and may not be reliable. Despite these potential limitations, you may still decide to design your own instrument, and in doing so, it's important to keep your instrument brief, make sure that your questions are clearly worded, and that your questions are appropriate for the client age and developmental level. It's also important to avoid making assumptions of literacy in many situations, and making sure the group members will be equipped to read and respond to the surveys. A follow-up survey is one way to provide the opportunity for evaluation, and oftentimes members have different perceptions with a little distance, so you may wait a short time before sending it. Another way of evaluating a group is to have members provide feedback while the group is running. For instance, say I run a new activity in one session, and I'm interested in whether or not I might want to use it again for a future session. I could take a few minutes at the end of the group session to get feedback on what the participants learned or found to be the most and least useful. I want to try to do this at the end of the session rather than during a later session to ensure that the details are fresh and accessible for members. As a leader, I could also make observations regarding changes that I notice. For instance, if during a group session I introduce the concept of the group I statements in their communication rather than you in expressing their feelings, I may later observe that the communication pattern has shifted in the group and more members are using I statements. This kind of observation should be included in my leader notes. Once a group has concluded, it can be helpful to collect information on member satisfaction, progress towards specific goals, as well as group processes that occur within the group, like a sense of belonging and safety. To a certain extent, collecting information on each of these aspects throughout the life of the group can provide insights as well. We want to avoid doing so much evaluation that we interrupt group process, but it can be helpful to check in with group members once or twice, depending on your time frame, to get a sense for issues like satisfaction, progress towards goals, and group process. Your authors describe reflective evaluation as a process that comes out of leader observation and serves to monitor group mood, themes, cohesiveness, norms, power, roles, and defenses, as well as verbal and nonverbal participation and feedback. This can serve as an informal kind of evaluation, and these types of observations serve group leaders very well when leaders are able to journal, reflect, and then discuss these observations with a co-leader or supervisor. Keep in mind that co-leaders should meet following each session to discuss their experiences and reactions, and group leaders who are working individually would benefit from supervision in order to do the same. Leaders can provide feedback for each other, and video recording can be another helpful source of feedback, but take care with this suggestion as there are important ethical and legal considerations related to consent when you're thinking about doing recordings. So let's think a bit about your group project and how you'll incorporate evaluation into your proposal. How and when will group and individual outcomes be measured? To figure this out, you'll need to consider what the group and the individual goals are, how you're assigning worth and value to the experience, how you want to collect and analyze the information, and then what you'll do once you have that information. Your specific intervention may already have the answers to some of these questions, but as a group, you need to decide how you're going to evaluate the group and communicate your decision in your project. So imagine that you are one of your clients whom you're likely to serve in your proposed group. Write down at least 2 reasons why they're coming to your group. Feel free to pause this or just go ahead and do it as we're talking. So of those 2 reasons why a group member might be coming to the group that you've proposed for your group project, pick one of these and then phrase it now as a vague goal that client might come to your group with. So what is a potential goal that a client might come to your proposed group with? Generally, clients want to feel better, but they may have other goals in groups, communicating better with a spouse, or stopping some kind of problematic behavior. So now what your job to do is to turn this into a SMART goal, but making sure that each of the requirements are satisfied. We want to look at these as we break it down. Is your goal specific? When it comes time to do an update, will the goal be clear enough to gauge any progress for you? As you go through each of these and you look back to the goal that you've created, you'll want to think about modifying that goal so that it does in fact meet these criteria. So the first one being, is your goal specific? Is it measurable? You should know how you'll measure your progress. Maybe there's a certain amount of time, a measurable increase or decrease in a certain behavior, but you'll want a way to make sure that you can measure progress towards your goal. Is your goal attainable? It's really important that members establish goals that are within their reach, as this promotes self-efficacy and can impact motivation for the client. So you want to go back again, make sure that goal is something that's reasonable, that's attainable, that's within that client's ability. Is your goal relevant? Does it relate to the purpose of the group and the needs of the client? If your client comes in with a goal that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what your group's promoting, then they're setting themselves up to be in a bad situation because obviously your group will not be able to address that goal if it's not something that's relevant to the time that you'll be spending together. Finally, is your goal time-bound? Are you clear about when you could expect this goal to be achieved? Having that kind of specific time frame helps the goal become real and actionable, because now we have an idea for when it could actually be accomplished. So again, you'll want to go through, use this slide again as you're developing the goals for your group proposal, and make sure that each of your goals hits all 5 of these basic necessities in terms of creating SMART goals. So now that you have an idea of what an example could be of a SMART goal for a fictional group member, let's talk about the treatment update, the final portion of your group project. Treatment plans and treatment updates will vary from setting to setting, agency to agency. For the purposes of our work together, the treatment update that you'll provide as part of your group project will be written about a fictional group member following your 6th session together. The treatment update must include information on each of the following sections: the client's general behavior, motivation, initial goals and progress towards those, as well as any verbal or nonverbal and resistant behavior from group sessions, and current needs that you're aware of, and any modifications that are required for the treatment plan. In each of these sections, take time to include material from your reading and lecture materials, citing specific behaviors and group dynamics as appropriate. So I offer this treatment plan update as a starting point for anyone who might be interested, although I'm happy to accept other formats as well. Just be sure to refer to the group project assignment and grading rubric to be sure that you fulfilled all of the requirements. Here you'll see room to include your group, the date of the treatment update, as well as the date of the first group session and the number of the group sessions. Next, you'll include the presenting concern that brought the member to the group. This can be a brief overview and need not be more than 1 to 3 sentences. Next, you'll want to include the individual goal or goals that the group member designated at the beginning of the group. Make sure that these are SMART goals, and feel free to return to that earlier slide for help creating SMART goals. Indicate the intended completion date and the progress that the member has made toward that goal. Are they on track? Has there been a setback? Did they successfully achieve that goal already? Finally, document any changes to the goal or the completion date for that goal based on the progress update for your goal. The next space contains an opportunity for you as a group leader to include your observations regarding behavior, motivation, participation, and possible resistant behavior. This is where your group may need to refer back to earlier lecture and reading materials in order to incorporate enough course information regarding group dynamics and member behavior. This section of the project is an opportunity to demonstrate your ability to identify and describe client behaviors within a group. Finally, you must describe any current needs that may be present. These could be housing needs or other support issues, and may also include some strategies for meeting these needs. Strategies may be within the group leader's ability, or they may include finding an outside resource to help the client. So as we wrap up this lecture on evaluation, let's review a few important points. Evaluation is an ongoing process that benefits both group members and group leaders, and can track the progress of individual members and the group as a whole. Evaluation of the group as a whole can be conducted through formal measures like surveys or scales that members fill out during or after the completion of a group, and may measure things like satisfaction, progress towards goals, and group process. Evaluation can also be done through more informal exercises, like asking for verbal reflection from group members, or group co-leaders taking time to reflect on observations and experiences after each session to make notes on significant events or opportunities to improve the group. Evaluation provides information that can be used to improve group leadership or the overall group experience moving forward. It gives us an opportunity to measure and communicate what we're doing and how it's working, and it also gives us information on the areas that might need improvement. Evaluation can also track individual progress through client plans and updates. For your group project, you'll need to take some time to consider what outcome measures you would like to use to evaluate the effectiveness of your group, and make sure that these measures are in line with the overall type and purpose of your group. Also, your client treatment update is an opportunity to evaluate a fictional member of the group and their progress towards SMART goals that you have decided on together. Please use this as an opportunity to demonstrate your mastery of the material group dynamics and member behaviors, and refer back to previous lectures as needed. Finally, keep in mind that I'm willing to look over any drafts that I receive on or before the date outlined in your syllabus. Thanks for listening to the lecture.
All right, so just running the groups together with leading the group and then writing a group proposal. So a lot of folks do this so that you have both a group that you are creating from. A lot of folks use the Girls Circle manual, and some people also go on to grants.gov and find a funding source, because when you do your internship or work for an agency, you might want to actually find money and find a way to find a funding source. Last semester, we had a student who was doing grants for STD testing, because apparently on campus we don't have very many spaces to get STD testing. And I guess there's like a 5-panel test and there's a few other different panel tests. But for some reason, grants.gov did not come up. Let me see if I can get you here. .gov. And I'm going to close that one. So if you go into grants.gov and maybe just search mental health counseling groups, you see a lot of the different funding that can come up and how you apply for it. So it is bigger here. I can't see it as well on my screen. So like here, when I did the search, there's several, and you see some of them are every year. Like the close date is 2025, but it was posted last year in 2022. That's the first one. It's the National Cooperative Drug Device Discovery Development Group for treatment of mental disorders or alcohol use disorder. And that's the very first one that comes up. There is, if you were trying to start your own group home, a lot of folks mention that they want to start their own group home. There's residential therapeutic group home services for unaccompanied children. So that must have to do with the refugees that have been coming across the border recently. That's a good example of one. And it looks like there is a large amount of funding for that. Let me click on that one for you guys. It opened just last month, May 24th, and it looks like the estimated total program funding is $75 million. The award ceiling is $10 million. And the minimum you would get is $1 million. So say you were running a group for PTSD for refugee immigrants that have endured the hike up through Guatemala, Mexico, into Texas. So like from Latin America to Texas, and they're unaccompanied. So there is $1 million for that. If you did apply or look at the related documents, here is some of them. You can download them and open them up. And it could be a group home that you're running. You can see how in depth this is. So when you do the program description, it shows services for unaccompanied children are authorized under Section 462 of Homeland Security Act of the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. In December of 2014, Health and Human Services released interim final rule standards to prevent, detect, and respond to sexual abuse or harassment involving unaccompanied children. They're accepting applications for fiscal year 2023 of unaccompanied children. The purpose of the project is to fund organizations that demonstrate an ability to provide high quality and child-centered residential care that ensures children's safety and well-being. So you can be a care provider if it lists 7 different things. So can offer residential services to children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, have a program that will provide capacity up to 12 beds per home or cottage, can accompany with all applicable state child welfare laws, regulations, and state licensing, provide suitable living accommodations, have the capacity to give them culturally appropriate meals and snacks, several sets of new clothing and personal grooming items, offer transportation to immigration courts, provide designated common areas for recreation, case management, confidential spaces for counseling, health services, and attorney meetings. So you see how in-depth that is. That's just the first one that comes up with the mental health groups. There are a few others like rehabilitation, research, and training for aging among adults with serious mental illness. So if you wanted to run like an older adults group, that is one of the options. You've got mental health first aid for public safety training. That's a big one. We've actually been doing that recently for of the folks that I'm working with. And one of these looks interesting enough that I will send a reply to them and make sure they have gotten our racial equity stuff. So it's a grant for mental health first aid. And this is one of the things some of us have worked on. There's a lot of different opportunities. And so with your final paper, writing and showing some of these documents is something that you would apply for, like trauma interventions for children and youth in foster care with complex mental, behavioral, and physical health needs. Also, pilot studies to test the initiation of mental health family navigator model to provide early access, engagement. Also, developing measures to advance quality in mental health care. Grants for expansion and suitability of comprehensive community mental health services for children with serious emotional disturbance. So you see where a lot of the different funding can come from in places that you would see and then with that being said, I wanted to dig back into the gentleman who I was showing groups for before. And I know that will be back to about early June and late May when we had some of the YouTubes with Dr. Kaplan and what he had done with groups. So Dr. Kaplan was one of the gentlemen I had said has written the book on groups and had a pretty good breakdown of running the group. So forming, storming, norming, and performing. And he is world renowned for some of the work that he does. And in he's got everything from depression to couples counseling to avoidant personality, understanding borderline personality. And he started these during the time of the pandemic because a lot of the places he had mentioned, he wasn't able to teach the classes in person, but he would do different stuff with groups. So if I search him, Group, that search was within here. He has basics of group counseling, so like the introduction, exploring group therapy, group counseling. He's got 12 videos total. Termination, which is the final stage. I was going to show that next week. He has the initial stage of the group, legal pieces, group dynamics, which is good, the transitional piece, and then the working stage. And I wanted to show you guys the working stage because he had some good stuff before the termination stage that was helpful. So in the working stage of the group, and group dynamics. He had some details that I wanted to go over for today.
Events are back, you guys. Events are back. They're booking speakers like you. They're paying them $5,000, $10,000.
Okay, so we're going to continue with our group therapy series. And in today's lesson, I'm going to talk to you about the working stage of group. As you may recall, that there are 4 general stages of group. We talked about the initial stage. We talked about the transition stage. The most immediate video I did before this, we talked about group dynamics and factors that are at play. Now let's talk about the working stage, which is the third of the 4 stages. All right, so let's start with our learning objectives. So the first learning objective is to appreciate the dynamics associated with group process and development, demonstrate some leader interventions for exploring fear at various stages of group. We'll identify key characteristics of the group during the working stage. We'll distinguish the difference between a working group versus a non-working group. We'll identify ethical and cultural relevant strategies for designing and facilitating groups. And then we'll continue with a discussion of choices that are made during the working stage, therapeutic factors that are at play and how they impact group effectiveness. We'll talk about self-disclosure from the member, self-disclosure from the leader, guidelines for giving and receiving feedback. And I talked about this briefly in an earlier lecture, the importance of compassionate criticism. And then we'll talk about identity, to identify issues with co-leaders during the working stage. So one thing that is important to start off with in principle is we talk about these 4 stages, but there's no arbitrary line between each phase. And when we talk about phases or stages, there has to be a transformative shift that happens in order to move from one stage to another, right? And some groups will make it to the working stage. Some groups may not reach the working stage, right? And the development of the group as a whole tends to ebb and flow, right? So it's dynamic, it's not static, it doesn't stay the same. So as I said earlier, work happens at every stage, not just a working stage. So I don't want you to think that working stage is now we're doing work. Remember when we talked about the goals of each stage, the goal of the initial stage is to establish trust. That's the work that's being done. The transition stage is addressing risk-taking and the initial stages of conflict, right? So each stage has its own function. Not every group reaches the working stage, as I said, and even if the group as a whole is in a working stage, not every individual is at the same point at the same time. So we have to understand our individual differences even when the group moves. So you have to be mindful where the group is and where the individual is. All right. But to reach the working stage, members must make a commitment to work through challenges and face issues and barriers that are interfering with the group's progress. So there has to be an openness for change. There has to be a willingness to receive criticism and work on any resistance or unwritten, agendas that a person has or hidden agendas that a person has. So it's important to commit that we're going to look at those. And I said work happens at every stage, but there is a deeper exploration of the self, deep exploration of the functioning within the group. And this occurs as a function of the group coming together. So when you have group cohesion, then you could start to look deeper. So that closeness that you have with the other members of the group allows you to feel safe, allows you to receive criticism, and allows you to explore blind spots that you might have on a deeper level. So that's important. So interventions at each stage. One intervention we have at the initial stage is to provide encouragement. When we talk about the transition stage, the interventions demand more from the member than at the initial stage. So now the member has to be self-driven a little more. And then in the working stage, the entire group is working. The entire group is focusing on the member's personal work, vice versa.
This changes everything we know about tinnitus. Neurologists have found tinnitus wipes your memory in less than 3 years. The ear buzzing is literally wiping.
Yeah. What's going on?
So you start by getting people to take risks and trust and share. Then they're self-governed. And then the group can put a spotlight on an individual. And last but not least, we encourage members to see how they change as a function of the group, right? So we look for transformation in the final stage. All right. So the group norms and behavior of the working stage. One norm is that we support and challenge members of the group. We encourage people to take risks. In terms of interventions, there's no singular intervention that you do. I will say that the lecture on theories and interventions was helpful because a lot of what we said comes back in this stage. There's definitely more interactions between the members. Members are more direct. Members are starting to challenge one another, and they're starting to focus on action-oriented behavior. All right, so we tend to see in a working group that there's a large amount of trust. That trust is established. Members' goals are clear and specific. They focus on the present. Now they're willing to make themselves known. Now, you may recall in the transition phase, we talked about people taking risks and putting their toe in the water. Now, they're no longer just putting their toe in the water, they're diving headfirst into the water, right? So they're making themselves known. And it came as a function of all the trust and risk-taking activities that occurred prior. Cohesion is close, everyone feels a bond to one another. Wherever there's conflict, it's identified, recognized, and explored. Remember, we said in a transition stage that conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict can result in closeness, can result in intimacy. So at this point, the members of the group can identify conflict. They can healthily address conflict. They can explore the sources of conflict and so forth. All right. In terms of a non-working group, it's sort of the opposite mirror of it. So instead of having trust, there's mistrust in the group, there's unexpressed feelings, there's a focus more on others than oneself. People tend to hold back, and instead of addressing conflict, they're ignored, or they're addressed in indirect ways. Now, what's interesting about this is, we said conflict can be a good thing, right? So ignoring conflict or avoiding conflict or trying to communicate or address conflict in indirect ways actually doesn't solve the problem. it creates an opportunity for there to be miscommunication or for people to misinterpret what you're trying to say. So all of these things have to be attended to in the working stage. So we have a choice, right? So there are decisions that people are making as members of the group. The first one is whether to share or not share, whether to self-disclose or whether to remain anonymous, right? So when people speak up in a group, they're taking a risk. That requires a sense of trust. Whereas people who remain silent, they're keeping their views anonymous, they're not actually giving the group the experience, right? Authenticity versus guardedness, right? So being real and being raw as appropriate, that would be being authentic, versus being guarded would be holding back and not allowing the true self to come out. Being spontaneous versus regulated, right? Being spontaneous, you'll notice in initial stages, the group leader might call upon people, right? But by the working stage, people should just naturally chime in, naturally share, demonstrate a sense of spontaneity. Whereas people might, if they don't feel that there's trust, they might be more regulated or guarded, or I use guarded, but they might control their actions a little more. Acceptance versus rejection. One of the biggest questions in the initial stage is whether or not you're going to be accepted or rejected, right? So at this point, you're making a decision whether you feel part of the group and accepted. If you feel more accepted, you're going to be more likely to participate. If you feel rejected, you're going to be more likely to distance yourself from the group and not take risks. Unity versus fragmentation. Unity or cohesion is absolutely essential for the working stage, right? Where versus fragmentation, where people are working on their own agenda versus the collective goals of the group, that would be more fragmentation. All right. Now the group, in terms of homework, we talk about giving homework. The group is not an end of itself. It's actually a place, it's a laboratory. That's the best way to say it. It's a laboratory where you can try things out. You can learn new behaviors, you can learn new sets of skills. It's a training ground, whatever you want to say. But the work should happen in between groups. So if you use homework, you give people an opportunity to connect to what happened in group between groups, which means that instead of having 60 to 90 minutes with these individuals, now you're giving them the opportunity to think about the experiences of group 24/7. You're giving them the full range of experience. Members can design or devise their own homework assignments, right? So when we talk about individual goals within a group setting, if you want to work on something, you say, well, what's one thing you might want to commit to this week? And then members might say, well, my goal is X. This week I'm going to work on Y. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. In terms of what you settle in on, many times the homework is done in a collaborative way, which is not just the member themselves, but the leader is supposed to facilitate that or shape that or change it up if appropriate, or guide the homework process. So the leader also plays a role in helping form homework. In psychoeducational groups, it actually is more often the leader who gives the homework. All right, so.
Franklin University makes it possible. Time has come, make a break.
So as you see, the leader plays an important role in a lot of these things in the group.
In terms of therapeutic factors that operate in a group, we talked about self-disclosure, sharing about oneself. There are different levels of that. That's important, right? So people should share about themselves. offer feedback. So this is other members of the group offering feedback about their experience of another person. Confrontation, and again, an appropriate confrontation, as we emphasized in another lecture. Finding a sense of cohesion or universality, hope, purpose. Now, these are a list you might have remembered you saw in the first lesson as well, but now you're starting to see them really at play and how they actually come. So people might come into a group very depressed and despondent, but as a function of the group process, they might feel more hopefulness, willing to take risks and trust, feeling accepted, feeling more empowered versus disempowered, feeling a catharsis, a release of whatever has been bothering them or plaguing them, working on their thoughts, focusing on a commitment to change, an invitation to experiment with who they want to be, not who they were in the past. And humor. Humor is important. I actually use humor all the time in session because I find that there's a natural tension that happens in all therapy processes. So using humor can release some of that tension. All right, so about self-disclosure, whenever you share, it should be related to the purposes of the group. It should help the group move forward. And those of you who've had the experiential part of the class, you've seen how group leaders can model self-disclosure in an appropriate way to get people talking, right? So self-disclosure is very important because it allows all the thoughts and feelings you're experiencing and that keep recurring to have an outlet, right? So your level of self-disclosure and that which you self-disclose, it depends on many things. Number one, the stage of the group might determine what's appropriate. So it's not uncommon for people to be very authentic in the initial stage, but in the working stage, people are gonna share at a deeper level, right? And in terms of what you disclose, no one can make you share something you don't want to share. So what you disclose, how much you disclose is entirely up to you, right? But we know that if people feel safe in a group setting, they're going to be more likely to self-disclose, right? Because they feel that they're not under attack. So when you give feedback, right? So another thing is giving feedback to other people. Give honest feedback, right? So you don't benefit another person by not giving them real feedback. So if you see something in a person that's not okay, you can bring it to their attention, but you should do it with sensitivity. And you may recall in an earlier lesson when you're offering constructive criticism, there were principles at play, right? So make sure those principles are fulfilled. Make sure that the other people know how their behavior affects you, right? So speak from your point of view in a non-judgmental way, and try not to offer global feedback like you never do this, you always do that, or overgeneralizations in general are not going to be helpful.
Most people have no clue that in 2023, the best way to make money on Amazon is not with physical product.
Catharsis, right? Catharsis is a release or an expression of pent-up emotions, right? So there are times in the group process where people are having an intense moment, and they're adding. You might have two members of the group locking horns, but as a function of sharing their experience, they feel released, they feel healing, right? And as a function of that, they feel closer to the person, even the person they were locking horns with. So you can have a catharsis or release by being authentic by sharing your emotions, releasing them. Now, be careful with how deeply you dive into emotions, because you have to be able to repackage the experience, right? So maybe that deep emotional experience wouldn't be appropriate for a parenting group, let's say. I don't know. Actually, I can see reasons why it might be appropriate for a parenting group, but there might be settings where that deep expression of emotions, you may not want to go that deep. All right. What happens after the cathartic event? Well, first you want to link the emotional behavior. So if they had this insight, this incredible self-discovery or release, we ask them, what are you thinking right now? What are you feeling? How might you take this and put it into action when it comes to behavior? So we link the emotions with thoughts and behaviors. And absolutely, it's important to link that catharsis with some kind of behavioral outcome or action plan going forward. When we talk about co-leading a group in a working stage, between group sessions, you're supposed to discuss the reaction to group members, see how each one's interacting with one another and how you can help participants better understand themselves, better understand their behavior within the group and resolve some of their conflict, right? So you also use an opportunity to evaluate how the group is going and how it's going as a group co-leader, right? So how are we doing as facilitators? And then, we evaluate orientation styles, self-disclosure, and so forth. You talk about the next step, right? Interventions we might use. Now, the member function. What should members be experiencing at the working stage? Well, they should come into group ready to talk. They should come into group ready to share experiences that they want to bring up or issues that they want to bring up. They should be committed to offering feedback to another person. And if they're receiving feedback, they should be committed to an open-mindedness to whatever feedback they're doing. They should be willing to take risks. They should be willing to practice new skills and interventions in their daily life. And they should be willing to evaluate how they're feeling with the group experience and their relative satisfaction with the group. Now, leader function, your job as a leader is to model appropriate behavior. We've been saying this from the initial stage, or continue to model self-disclosure and appropriate behavior. If people are trying to take risks, you want to support people's willingness to take risks and encourage people to get a little bit beyond their comfort zone. And then if they do take a risk, you want to help them turn it into some action, right? You also want to, there are going to be times when you want to do a deeper dive on a person, further self-exploration, right? So in the event that you see someone is stuck or about to be having catharsis, you might do a deeper sense. You might look for common themes across members of the group to provide some universality. I like to use the phrase, can anyone join this person with this experience? Has anyone had a similar experience, right? And with that, you're identifying universality. And then, you're promoting behaviors that will increase cohesion as a function of decreased cohesion. So that is a very quick rundown of the lesson. So I'm going to stop there. And until next time, everybody.
All right, so you see
I
a lot
paid
of
off
the details of the
$495,000.
working stage of the group. There's a lot of breakdowns in there. Dr. Kaplan said with all the different varieties of groups, some people just run a support group and that shows up for them. They also sometimes have the different group dynamics. So that's some of the things that you'll have to manage up until the transitional stage of the group. So these are some of the things that you'll deal with while you're running the group. I know for the assignment in class, we're having you just run 1 week of a group, and normally they're 10 to 12 weeks long. Just to get your feet wet, so you're ready for internship, which could be next year for some of you, or the following year. There's also preparing your own group. There's a lot of materials out there besides Girl Circle. That was the one that we used at Lighthouse that was the most helpful because it tells you from start to finish what it would look like to run the group. There was another piece on both group dynamics and the transitional stage. I'm just going to do dynamics today and then the transitional stage Thursday, if none of you come in to lead it. So
Hi,
feel free to
everybody.
ask
Welcome
questions.
back to the group therapy course. In this lesson, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about group dynamics. Group dynamics, or what you might hear referred to as process variables. And group dynamics or group process variables are factors within a person that could influence group outcomes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. I have to pull it up. And we're going to go through it. All right, so when we talk about group dynamics, just 1 second. I just adopted a kitten, so my kitten's going to steal the show. All right, so in concept, so group dynamics are, as I said, factors within a person or within the group that impact how we relate to one another. So when we think about it, the structure of the group, it guides interaction among group members. We also look at the social process by which people interact with the group environment. And we look at factors such as personality, power, and behaviors. Individual behaviors, group behaviors, as well as group leader functioning and how that plays a role. So when we talk about group dynamics, there are different kind of behaviors at play. Now, I will say that I am using slides that I did not write. This comes from a training I went to on group dynamics, so you'll notice that they have the British spelling of behaviors. But in any event, I wanted to, give credit and not take credit for someone else's intellectual property. All right, credit for someone else's intellectual property. The goals of the group, you have initiating. Initiating is a task behavior, initiating that which is needed for the group to move forward. Information seeking, right? So gathering information or information giving, providing information to other members of the group. Clarification is a group dynamic, clarifying ideas, bringing closure, and then consensus testing. Consensus testing, I believe, in an exercise in the class group, we did an exercise on consensus testing just to see where we are with the topic. Basically, that's just polling the group and seeing where everyone is at. We also have other behaviors such as maintenance behaviors, so keeping the status quo or keeping things going, right? So maintenance is maintaining the group cohesion. Could be encouraging as a factor that could promote group cohesion. Thinking about how to improve the group atmosphere, harmonizing, thinking about how to blend together, how to work together in a reasonable, peaceful way, compromising, right? So that's a biggie when we think about group dynamics. We don't all have to agree as a group, right? So, and there are different kinds of groups. There might be work groups, there might be group therapy, and task groups. We talked about this in, I guess it was the first lesson, but compromising is important when the group is of two minds, where some people think one thing and another group of people think a different way. So ultimately, you might go in the direction of the majority, but that doesn't mean that those who are in the minority lose their voice. They might have to compromise, but they also still should be validated insofar as, you know, their experience, even though it was not the prevailing position, they still have rights. And gatekeeping is deciding what goes and what goes through. Kind of conversation we have. These are gatekeeping activities. It's basically what you allow to continue, what you don't allow to continue. So when we talk about the group task, there are a whole host of group tasks, and a person can assume one of these roles within a group, but they can also assume more than one role. So they can be an initiator, contributor. So in that context, they might start a dialogue off. We talked about gathering information, information seeking, information giving. They might offer opinions, right? So, or seek opinions from others. They might elaborate, they might elaborate is to expand upon. They might be a coordinator within the group, an orienter, an evaluator, an energizer. Now, an evaluator is one who weighs the experiences of others. Now, you will see people will offer their opinion on one another once they feel safe. So that is something to be concerned with, how you offer opinion. Energizer is doing more of encouraging and mobilizing other people, or helping other people mobilize, I should say. Procedural technician, that's usually the group leader who guides the procedural direction, and the recorder is the person who takes note. There's no formal note taking other than session notes from the group leader, but a recorder might be like, well, in a previous session you said this, and they're bringing back to your attention some of the things that were stated earlier. So we talked about task behavior, we talked about maintenance behavior, but it's also important to talk about self-interested behavior, because if the other behaviors help you grow and lead towards group cohesion, these kind of behaviors are going to actually undermine the group process or the group dynamics. So being overly controlling or dominating, that could be the group leader or the member. By the way, all of these behaviors can be manifested by any member of the group, whether it be the group leader or whether it be a group member. So you don't want to, dominate the conversation or overly control the conversation as a group leader. You want to let things go. And as a group member, you also don't want to dominate or be overly controlling. We talked about compromise, right? Compromising is sort of like the flip side of dominating and controlling. So if compromising will help maintain group cohesion, dominating and controlling will interfere with it. Blocking we talked about as a micro skill. It's important to block inappropriate behaviors. But that is doing a cutoff if you're the group leader. There's another form of blocking where you don't allow the process to go, right? And that could be negative. So someone who derails the conversation or abruptly changes the conversation when someone's about to have an insight, that's a more negative form of blocking. Manipulating is self-explanatory. Trying to work on one of your hidden agendas and getting other people to go with your hidden agendas, that would be manipulating. Belittling is self-explanatory. When offering constructive feedback or constructive criticism, we don't attack people. And then splitting hairs is you might have people who argue all over things, but it's based on such a granular level, such a small, minute level that in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter, but they're like picking at little things or splitting hairs. So they're, going to such a granular level to create discord. All right, so splitting hairs, you might hear people say, oh, we're arguing over semantics. If you're arguing over semantics, it's likely that someone is splitting hairs. All right. Now, there are different factors that impact group dynamics. So there are norms that are expected of people. There are roles within the group, and status can play a role. In terms, those are structural factors of group dynamics. And then you have functional factors, which is cohesiveness, which is really what I focus on the most, is making sure the group is working as a unit, because that cohesiveness is what's going to bring you to a functional working group. Social loafing, where some people within the group are working, other people are relying on others. So the best way to describe social loafing is think about group projects. And there's always one person who does more of the work, and there might be a person who doesn't do their share, and they coast on the progress of the group. So social loafing happens in group therapy too, where the group as a whole is moving on, but you're coasting on their effort. So you have to pay attention to make sure that everybody is indeed contributing to the group. And then you have to pay attention to conflict, right? I think it's important to know that not all conflict is bad. I think I've said this in a series of lectures on group therapy, but with conflict comes intimacy. So you have to pay attention to general group conflict, but then interpersonal conflict between several individuals within the group. All right. So those are the types of group dynamics. Now we have to talk about factors or exchange theory. Exchange theory comes really out of economics and economics theories about weighing the cost and the benefit. So According to exchange theory, these are going to affect the group norms and the group effectiveness, but everybody is weighing the cost or the effort involved, the reward that's received, and the ratio between the reward and the cost. So that is what exchange. So it's cost benefit analysis, and most people want to maximize benefit and minimize the cost or effort. So in general, you have to pay attention to that and how one determines their general approach is based on what society expects of them, their past experiences based on cost, effort, reward, what they've seen, and alternative ways to get to that outcome, right? So all of these play a role. So we said there are different structural factors. One of those factors is related to group norms. So group norms are standards of acceptable behavior. They could be formal or informal, right? So formal norms are that which was stated. As mentioned, many people have a pre-group meeting, and in the pre-group meeting, they state their expectations of the group. But there are implicit or informal norms as well, right? So ultimately, what the group norms do is there are expectations of the group, from the group, and about the group, about how the group should function. So those are collectively held expectations. And group norms, why do we have norms? Why do we have expectations? Is because it allows for predictability. It allows for adequate functioning and appropriate functioning within a group. Now, whether you're from one group, or whether you're part of one group or another group, or you're part of one community or another, or a society, they may differ across groups, but all groups have group norms. You know, think about society. There are expectations of you in our culture, and you know, if you deviate from them, then you run the risk of adverse consequence, right? Doesn't mean that the norms in a Western or US society are better. They might differ, they're different, but if you go to another place, they have their own norms and expectations in society. And if you deviate from those, you run the risk of adverse consequence. So, proscriptive norms. So a prescriptive norm is basically an expectation about what is supposed to be done. So like a prescription. A proscriptive norm is what is not supposed to be done. So the difference between prescriptive and proscriptive. Now, there are different types of norms. There are norms about appearance. So when you give a presentation or when you're on a job interview, there are appearance norms. You have to dress in a suit or, you know, dress the part. Performance norms are expectations related to what you say or what you do. And if you don't say, you know, how you handle not sharing within a group. And then allocation of resources and arrangement norms. So an allocation of resource would be if a group, you know, is working, you might clarify that, you know, you're not always going to be able to provide everyone with the same amount of attention, depending on the conversation. So, but across the span of the group, it will be more balanced. So you talk about resources within and across sessions, and then you have arrangement norms. So an arrangement norm is contingency or consequence of, you know, violating a norm. So in terms of cohesiveness, is how attracted or bonded one is to another person, how motivated you are to stay within a group, right? So if there's group cohesion, you're going to be more connected to the group and want to stay within the group. Whether you share a common goal, whether you have common values, all of these factors are going to affect group cohesion. Now, so here is just a model of factors that impact group cohesion or cohesiveness and some of the consequences of it. So group size, and we talked about, you know, the magical number of 8 to 12 is roughly what groups are today. But the larger the group, it affects group cohesion to result in diversity of opinions, which could be fine, and how you handle that's going to be fine. There might be competition for attention and resources, and differing views on group identity. And then you have issues with relative success, right? All of these impact group cohesion. Now, that group cohesion or cohesiveness is going to dictate how much a person participates, right? So think about group size. The larger the group, the level of participation goes down. The smaller the group and the more homogeneous the group is, right, the more likely you're going to have conformity, right? When you talk about group identity versus, you know, individual identity and that competition, that's going to either increase or decrease the relative emphasis on group goals versus personal goals. And then, you know, success and so forth. You get the idea. I just went down and showed how going across one-to-one could impact the group. All right. Now we talked about status. Now, if there's differences in status within a group, that is going to impact group cohesion or group cohesiveness. So, ideally, no person should be given a position superior to the other. And in the groups that I run, I make it clear that I'm a participant observer, which means that for the time of the group, I'm not superior to anyone. I'm just another person within the group. Now, granted, there is an implicit difference because I am the group leader and they are paying me. But I want to reduce as much of the status difference as possible to make sure that we can work together and there's no threat there. Now, the more differences you have in status, the more you run the risk of having hierarchies within the group. And having classes or hierarchies within a group is going to result in greater conflict amongst group members. So, how do we improve group cohesion? Here are some factors that could improve group cohesion. Make smaller groups, right? So, make the group small enough that everyone can contribute and can't hide, right? The larger the group, the more a person can fade out, but not too small where there's too much of a spotlight on any one person. Encourage agreement with group goals. So some of the discussions you have is, well, what do you want to get out of group, right? So in group settings, it's important to discuss that so that the group knows the direction they're going to take, because without a clear goal amongst the group, you're going to flounder, you're going to struggle. Increasing the time members spend together is important, right? So the longer the group runs, the more people bond. In fact, you know, when we talk about open groups that don't have a specific endpoint, people can stay for years, but you see them really bonded to one another. Increasing the status of the group as a whole, right, is going to be important. Encouraging healthy debate and competition of ideas, and then rewarding the whole group, not any individual member, or praising the whole group, not any individual member. So in group therapy, that was a great group, everyone. I see how hard everyone worked, rather than saying, you know, Dan, thank you for sharing today. You know, that was really, really great of you, right? So that might affect other members who didn't get the praise. So conflict, again, conflict is, you know, healthy and normal. It provides a sense of intimacy, but here's the deal. Conflict occurs more when there's not enough resources for everyone to get what they want. So there's going to be a battle for attention, a battle for approval, a battle for prevailing ideas, and so forth. So people will compete. Now, so the goals of the group, the needs of the group, there could be conflict. The ideas, the values, and attitudes, I think I said some of that already. There can be competition. Behaviors that are linked to conflict is competing, which is self-explanatory, where people are at each other to sort of win against one another. Avoiding, right? Not doing what you're supposed to within a group. Those are oftentimes considered the more negative aspects of conflict behaviors, but compromising, accommodating, and collaborating are the positive side. So if you work through the conflict, these three factors are going to help you be successful. Now, sources of conflict could be prejudice. So everybody has implicit biases. Everybody has prejudices. Now, prejudice and racism are not always the same thing, but a prejudice is just a negative attitude towards an individual based on their belongingness to a particular group or section of society. So prejudice is your attitude, discrimination is your behavior, right? And so discrimination would be treating people differently based on your prejudice. And then social categorization, the us versus them, it's the in-group versus the out-group, that's what that is. We're going to always show favor to those who are more similar to us, and we're going to show negative biases and prejudices versus those who we categorize as the out-group or the them. So we want to enhance our personal identity, or, you know, those who are more similar to us, and we want to castigate or push aside those who are different. And this has both biological and social roots, right? So nature and nurture at play with this. So that is, you know, a very brief lecture on group process. Now, there are other behaviors. We talked about problematic behaviors in group. Those are also group dynamic variables, and that's important to say. So if you go to an earlier lecture in this series, you'll hear a discussion on some of the other problematic behaviors. So I'm gonna stop there though, and until next time, take care.
All right, so just to cruise through a lot of those group dynamics, group behaviors, opening a group, and then closing with a group. I wanted you guys to have those. We'll do, as I mentioned, termination next week, because we've already done the initial stage of the group and some of the group dynamics. Transition to stage 2, like kind of finishing up. I'll aim for Thursday. Sorry about the commercial, but aiming for Thursday.
I've been loving
on
Vegamore for the last 2 years. If you watch my videos,
The
you know
transition
that
stage.
I swear by
of the group and what that looks like. To come lead in person, that's perfect.